Hello. I'm finally posting after a very long time, after a very long hiatus. I am finally back. Uh, the reason why I have not posted in so long was because I lack a mic. I lacked a mic, but now I have this headset. Um, also, so that's why I was gone for so long. I would like to preface this with with a disclaimer. I think that this video is one of the worst done by Armchair Historian due to how inaccurate it is, especially when it comes to Ambrose Burnside. I'm only covering Ambrose Burnside at 12:19 in the video due to how inaccurate it is. I know that this portion of the video, 12:19 to the end, is incredibly inaccurate, and they treat Ambrose Burnside like a doormat quite unfairly. You can steal this video, do whatever you want, re-upload it, not give me any credit. I don't care. I just want to clear some things up, and I would encourage you to actually steal it because I just want to get the word out about Ambrose Burnside and clear some things up that this video uh, clear some mistakes by this video that I think are quite quite astounding that they could be made by somebody who claims to run a YouTube channel. I suppose that is why they are called the Armchair Historians, because they look at things from only face value. They really trash on Ambrose Burnside, but they don't delve in at all into Joseph Hooker, who was objectively worse than Ambrose Burnside. Objectively worse.
With Burnside on deck for the next stage of the echelon assault to.
Also, I'd like to say his assault was a diversionary attack with hopes of something more. That's it. Nothing else. Just a diversionary assault with the hopes of something more. It wasn't the coup de grace, or however they put it. It wasn't the main assault. It was the last thing from a main assault. It was a diversion. And let me just point out how difficult the terrain he faced was. Burnside Bridge. Let's look at it. This is the Confederates' position. This is taken from the point of view of the Confederate position. Look, you have a perfect view. You have a perfect view right there. In fact, I think the Confederates were even high up. We're a bit higher up. Let me just find a good video. A good picture. Are these all? Here we go. Look at that incline. You have Confederates all along here. All up here at the top of this hill. Firing down at Burnside Bridge with this photo, with this point of view. In fact, they were actually farther up, so they had an even better view. It's just imagine being ordered to charge up this very steep incline, even with even with just the small amount of men that were defending this. It was still insanely difficult to take, with withering fire going down on the Federals as they tried to cross this bridge. And these waters right next to the bridge were insanely deep. There was no way that anybody could ford here. In fact, generals came over. A group of generals actually inspected Burnside's bridge to see if there was anywhere they could ford. And they came to the conclusion that it was impossible to ford anywhere near the surrounding area of the bridge. Hence why Burnside's bridge exists. And also, the ford that Burnside, he had no cavalry, so he couldn't scout for a ford. The ford he did use wasn't even that good because it was up to like the chest of the Union of the Federal soldiers, so almost or the waist of the Federal soldiers, which is very, 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 very deep by military standards for a ford. So at least during this time period, because you have to keep the powder dry and stuff like that. So the men could only cross one at a time, which is why Burnside's bridge, which is and then that will tie into later why Burnside's bridge took so long to take.
To the south, Burnside finds himself commanding a full corps against a skeleton crew. McClellan allegedly orders Burnside to advance over the Antietam Creek Bridge at 8 a.m.
Allegedly. Yes, it is allegedly, because it's not true. It is factually incorrect. He sent the order at 9. That 8 a.m. estimate comes from his later after-action report in 1863. Not the original one, the one in 1863. McClellan, in its immediate after-action report of Antietam, the true one that really outlines Burnside's purpose, because the 1863 one is also really contradictory and probably has political motivations behind it with the 1864 election coming up and all of that. So the order was really sent at 9 o'clock and received at 10 o'clock, and Burnside got moving at 10:10. So he was able to take the bridge at 1 o'clock. That's just 3 hours. And against that topography, that insanely steep incline, literally one of Joseph Hooker generals, Joseph Hooker being literally the worst hand, the only person that Ambrose Burnside disliked, the only person, mind you, Ambrose Burnside was an amazing person. The only person that Ambrose Burnside disliked was Joseph Hooker, and one of his generals inspected the Confederate position and said that the Confederates could have no stronger of a position. So imagine that's quite insurmountable. That's basically insurmountable odds. It's basically impossible. But still, Ambrose Burnside was able to do it, and in 3 hours, no less, with no cavalry to support him, and no help, basically, and no fording points.
And seize the high ground beyond to advance upon Sharpsburg.
Also, by the way, Burnside Bridge wasn't his actual objective. Sharpsburg was.
An order that should have reached him an hour and a half later, with the fortunes of battle being what they are. Hypothetically, Burnside...
Hypothetically, he's just inferring here. This is something you should never do. He wasn't there. He doesn't have the research to support it, because if he did, he obviously wouldn't be lying through his teeth, basically. If he had any research to support this, other than reading a Wikipedia article. It's all hypothetical. He's not even right about when the order should have reached Ambrose Burnside. The reason why it took so long for the order to reach Ambrose Burnside was because the courier actually got lost on his way to Ambrose Burnside. Also, Ambrose Burnside not actually being in charge of the 9th Corps, John Parke being in charge, I believe, they were literally 10 feet away from each other, so any delay in orders was just BS. It's a non-argument. It's a it's just invalid. They were literally 10 feet away from each other. There would have been no delay, other than like a couple seconds.
Burnside should have been able to steamroll over the bridge and accomplish his
Oh, it's so easy when you're sitting there in your armchair in retrospect, isn't it?
objectives by noon. Burnside,
But I knew he did it an hour later.
his pride still wounded by his commanders being shuffled around.
You're kidding me. Ambrose Burnside had no reason to believe that the wing structure would have changed. By the way, he was never informed of the change in wing structure. Hence why he was, and also McClellan did not approve, like Napoleon, of his subordinate commanders exercising much independence. So Ambrose Burnside was very reluctant to take over the Ninth Corps again because of this. But yet again, they were 10 feet away from each other in the same building, in the same headquarters, same tent. The entire battle right next to John Park, who also was amazing. Who was also very good, served very ably. So that's why. And also Ambrose Burnside having his pride hurt by his wing being dissolved is may have been true. However, it did not affect him in the slightest, at least not to his staff. He was still his jovial old self. It's reported that he was his jovial old self, except for one isolated instance where he yelled at a courier who was trying to push him along unfairly. That courier didn't really know the situation because he'd just arrived with just orders to nudge Burnside along. He didn't know the situation on the ground. Ambrose Burnside was really doing the best he could. He did the best that I'd say anybody could have done at Burnside Bridge. Even Grant. I wouldn't even say that Grant could have done a better job than Burnside did at Burnside's Bridge. So Burnside was given literally the hardest job on the battlefield, and he still did it in under 3 hours. And I think that all this Burnside bashing is completely undeserved. And Burnside was literally the nicest person ever, so I highly doubt he'd be the child throwing a tantrum that the Armchair Historian tries to portray him as.
Essentially ignored McClellan.
Essentially ignored McClellan. What do you mean? He responded. No, I'm not actually. I'm a bit foggy on the details, but I do believe he tried to send a response, but he couldn't because there was no telegraph cables connecting him. So McClellan just sent aides just sent couriers one after another, very constantly, without giving Burnside really a chance to respond. While he was preoccupied with taking the bridge, I might add.
Took a second written command, followed by a visit by the Inspector General, the Army's highest law enforcement officer, to get the petty Burnside moving.
The petty Burnside. I feel insulted. I'm physically repulsed by this. It's completely out of character for Burnside to be petty. He wasn't even petty against George McClellan until the last days of the war. And even then, he never did anything about it. You're saying that the man who literally sacrificed his entire reputation at Fredericksburg just to assist the administration and their war effort, completely unprompted, I might add, would be petty to his best friend. That is just something I have a very, very, very hard time believing.
When they finally get to the bridge, Burnside's forces drive Confederate skirmishers away before splitting off.
Also, this map is incredibly misleading. Look how flat it is. When there was really just literally a massive hill right next to it, right in front of the bridge, that the Union also had to charge up.
The main force makes to fight its way across the bridge, while a splinter force goes to ford the
Again, this is incredibly misleading. The ford was so deep they could only march single file, and it was much farther down the river, down the creek, because it was impossible to ford anywhere but quite far downstream. So they had to march, and even then, they still had to march single file because it was that deep. It was that narrow of a ford. Hence why Ambrose Burnside was only able to take it after 3 hours, because he was able to finally get his troops over the ford, then organized a flanking attack, which isn't covered obviously, flanking attack, and central in conjunction with a central push on the bridge to clear the Confederates.
The river downstream. Defending the bridge is a single rebel brigade under General Robert Toombs.
Yeah, but these guys had literally the strongest position in the entire battle. In fact, probably had the strongest defensive position for the entirety in any battle that took place in 1862. It's arguable that they had some of the strongest defensive topography in the entire war.
Who has his men lay down heavy fields of fire across the bridge. The Union fights hard and
Now, see, this is where the Confederates would have been positioned, at that hill. That's shown right here.
takes the bridge in short order,
But they aren't. Almost like almost like this portion of the video is incredibly inaccurate.
Due to Burnside's previous stalling,
Stalling. He acted within. Stalling. He moved his forces within 10 minutes. 10 minutes of receiving his order. Stalling. What stalling, man? Look at that stalling Ambrose Burnside's doing, waiting 10 minutes. Taking 10 minutes to get his forces moving. What stalling?
He must take time to consolidate his men before driving onto Sharpsburg.
And this is true, by the way. He had to consolidate his men because he was desperately asking for reinforcements. Because he knew that if he was able to continue his advance with the reinforcements, mind you, because his corps was heavily suffered massive casualties. His corps suffered massive casualties. So I didn't really have my reserves left. So he needed reinforcements because he knew that in conjunction with the left flank, mind you, during this time Ambrose Burnside still thought the left flank was advancing as planned, that he could very easily pincer the enemy with said reinforcements. But McClellan said that he didn't have any reinforcements to give him, which was a flat-out lie. Just like how he had no cavalry to give him because he was hoarding all the cavalry. Because he was hoarding 5,000 of his cavalry in the center for nothing, for almost no reason, basically. On the cusp of victory, McClellan yet again lets victory slip from his grasp.
It is 2 p.m., and the fighting in the north has concluded. Lee's army is spent. All of his
Ambrose Burnside didn't know this, by the way, that the fighting in the north had concluded.
Reserves are committed or destroyed. Numerous officers have fallen in battle, and only his center force remains intact and ready. But all is not doom and gloom for the Confederacy. Before the battle was joined, Lee sent a message to the 3,000-strong garrison at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, requesting support, and initial trickles of Confederate reinforcements under A.P. Hill begin arriving at a 17-mile quick march. It is time for
A.P. Hill's corps, who was able to reinforce Toombs right as Ambrose Burnside was just completely spent. He had no manpower left to give, basically. And he was receiving no reinforcements. He didn't even have ammunition to give his men until very, very, very late, almost by the time the battle ended, despite constant pleas throughout the battle for reinforcements and ammunition. He finally got the ammunition, not the reinforcements, just the ammunition. At the very end of the battle, right when his lines were at breaking point, and he was still able to hold, even with but with tons of green regiments. Even though he was top heavy with green regiments, he was still able to hold his position against insurmountable odds and repeated Confederate counterattack. And with no reinforcements and with no ammunition.
For the Federal,
they were down to 5 rounds a man, actually, in some portions of his line, before he finally received ammunition.
Assault on Lee's center, defended by a thinly stretched patchwork of divisions and brigades. Lee's only hope is for Hill's main force to come, and come quickly. Burnside's men are ready to begin at 3 p.m., and he orders an echelon attack against Lee's position at Sharpsburg. The Federals start strong, pouring into the outskirts of Sharpsburg.
It wasn't necessarily echelon, because that suggested be kind of piecemeal. How come they have ramrods right now, but not in the rest of the video? If you see the video, you watch the entire thing, you know that throughout the entire video, ramrods were not used when reloading their muskets, and they finally use them now. Thank God.
And overrunning several rebel positions and gun emplacements.
And this is with no ammunition and with no reinforcements, I might add.
But almost as soon as the fighting begins, Hill's main force from Harper's Ferry takes to the field, many wearing captured Federal uniforms. The sudden appearance of these blue-clad Confederates sows confusion in the Union ranks, and Hill's men intercept a drive from the Union to swing around the rebel right flank. Burnside, in a stunning display of competence, commits his reserves to answering Hill's attack. The triumph of Hill's arrival is replaced by deadlock.
That was literally all the men that Ambrose Burnside had. He committed every division, every brigade to the battle, basically. Every brigade that he could force over the bridge. So he had no men and no ammunition, and still was able to repulse both Toombs and Hill. And Griffin has the audacity. He has the audacity to say, "Oh, in a moment of confidence, like he's some sort of outlier." Like, he could have done a better job. This was literally the hardest job anybody was given in the entire battlefield. Need I remind you of these massive heights that the Confederates were defending?
The rebels hold on tight, and a bloody stalemate takes hold as both sides continue slugging it out until darkness falls. After all the blood and death, the shattering of units and loss of commanders, neither side can truly claim victory. Antietam is a bloody draw.
I actually think that McClellan can claim victory. He was able to repulse Lee and kick him out of Maryland, so that was still kind of a Union victory. Definitely a strategic Union victory, without doubt, because the Union could replace their troops. The Confederacy cannot. McClellan, for all the McClellan, never mind.
It is a draw that utterly devastates the Confederate Army, however. Lee's men have been all but annihilated, and his staff begs him to pull back. But Lee doggedly refuses, declaring that if McClellan wants to try again come morning, he will be waiting. McClellan's men haven't fared much better, however, and McClellan orders his artillery arrayed on the high ground, with his infantry dug in to defend it.
You see, this is why I think that McClellan's removal was still kind of unfair. Whilst he was a terrible person, even planning at one point to coup the government, to coup the U.S. government, his removal from head of the Army of the Potomac was still quite unfair. His army was just as battered and bruised as the Confederacy's, and risking the remainder of his army, like Meade at Gettysburg, assuming it would just be unfair. It would just be stupid, frankly, to risk the remainder of his army after taking such a beating. McClellan, in my opinion, was a sound defensive general, but a terrible offensive general. He was just far, far too paranoid for field command. and also moved quite slow as well, whilst Ambrose Burnside moved incredibly fast. Like I said, he got his entire corps moving in 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
The next day, September 18th, Lee is convinced to withdraw. The Battle of Antietam would see 22,717 Americans become casualties in 12 hours of combat. It remains the single bloodiest day in American history. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia left the field a hollow shell, and with the defeat of Braxton Bragg in Kentucky not long after, the rebels' need for foreign aid became ever more dire. But Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, issued not long after the Battle of Antietam,
I like to say the Emancipation Proclamation did wonders for keeping most of Europe of the war. And right now, in 2022, we kind of hate Russia, but back then, Russia was literally the only nation to openly support the Union. So, props to Alexander the Second.
would reframe the Civil War in the eyes of the world as a fight to end slavery, and make supporting the Confederacy untenable. The Confederacy's ambitions of invading Maryland and taking Washington went up in smoke,
That's why I think it's a Union victory.
and the way was clear for the Union to strike back at the Battle of Fredericksburg. But that is for another video.
I'll probably go over Fredericksburg in another video. In conclusion, I think that this was I'm going to destroy them. By the way, with it if they dare do a Fredericksburg video. But overall, I think this was one of their worst videos ever. Honestly, it's a shame because the Civil War is really interesting too, and especially people like Ambrose Burnside. Oh my God, he's probably one of the most interesting. He's definitely one of the most interesting and overlooked people in the entire Civil War, if not just for his character alone. But his generalship is also insanely underrated. In my opinion, he was one of the most competent commanders in the entire war, and I will gladly fight to defend his reputation in the comments for years to come. Alright, that's everything. Thank you for watching. See ya.